This is the Andrew Lake Podcast, and in this episode, we're talking about the spectrum of satisfaction. Today's discussion is about satisfaction, and I'd like to start with a personal anecdote, if I may, about how I started thinking about this. I recently attended, well, it wasn't recently, it was a little while ago, but I attended my 10-year high school anniversary, and it was quite a strange event, quite a surreal event to run into people and talk to people that I haven't seen in about a decade. There were many awkward and insightful interactions that I had that evening. But one of the people that I connected with most was my old drama teacher. So she taught my drama class, acting class. We learnt about the different methods of acting. And we talked quite a lot throughout the evening. We kept bumping into each other. She's an incredible lady who cares very deeply for her students, still at the same school, still teaching the same class. She has a dynamic of being drawn towards those students that need more help, those students that are neglected by the other adults in their life, either their parents or other teachers or other adults that could be role models but aren't. And this is something that I really admired because I felt a little bit neglected as a teenager, and she had really helped me quite a lot, and she'd been quite a positive influence on my upbringing through that time in my life, which is one of the very few people that I could say that about. But we kept talking throughout the evening, and I was telling her about all of the things that I'm into now, all the amazing things that I've found, all of the wisdom that I've learned from reading books and pursuing knowledge and trying out these different transformative practices like personal development and self-help and therapy and meditation and spiritual practice and things of that nature. And I was trying to demonstrate to her and just convey to her just how amazing it is to come through from adolescence all the way through to now and to see this incredible transformation that has happened. It's really a world apart from the sort of person that I was back then to the person that I am now. And we were discussing this, and she sort of said to me, now what happens if one day all of that, it doesn't mean anything anymore? What happens if you all of a sudden don't find it satisfactory, or it's not satisfying for you, and it just plops out of nowhere? And when she said that, I sort of just laughed and had a bit of a giggle to myself because, first of all, I think it showed a bit of a misunderstanding of what the nature of what I'm into is. And second of all, what I've got is not something that can disappear because it doesn't exist. How can something disappear if it doesn't exist? I think what she was alluding to, or what she was doing, was lumping spiritual practice and meditation in with dogmatic religion. So dogmatic religion, as it were, Christianity, she was a little bit against. She sort of couldn't understand why anyone would be drawn to religion, as it's such a false and negative and like a crutch for your thing that you need to lean on, a crutch for help that you use. So she was lumping all that in with religion, and I struggled to really point out the difference. But when she said, what happens if you don't find it satisfying, and I laughed, I sort of thought about the question for a second, and then I said, well, do you want to talk about satisfaction? Perhaps we should have a conversation about satisfaction. And I don't know what the response was. I think she just gave me a bit of a nervous look. But the point is that it got me thinking about what is satisfaction, and why is that question a little bit pointed? Why does it really get to you if you ask it in the right way, in the right context? If you're having a conversation with someone and you're really going deep about what sort of stuff you're into, and they ask you, are you satisfied? It is quite a heavy question. It's quite a confronting question if you have the weight of understanding of its implications behind it. So that's what we're discussing today. And I think what we'll do to dissect this satisfaction dilemma is, well, we'll put it into a spectrum. And the way we'll do that is by contrasting it and associating it with other words. So here it is, without further ado. What is satisfaction? Well, satisfaction is dependent on your life conditions. It's dependent on your biological conditioning, your personal conditioning, your psychological conditioning. It's dependent on your paradigm, your web of beliefs, your web of values. And I think there's a few extreme examples that we can think of to understand this straight away. Basically, what I'm trying to say is satisfaction is relative. So, for example, let's imagine a tradie, hardcore, hard-lifting, brick-laying tradie. And it's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and he has been slogging out the bricks all week. And he arrives at the pub at 4:05, and he's got that first beer. He's with his mates, his hands are still dirty, he's still scrubby all over, there's brick and dust in his hair, and it's a hot summer day, and he sits down with his mates and he takes that first sip of beer. Not only that, but he's also got a cigarette to go with it. And he's just got that perfect release of unwinding. He's got the whole weekend ahead, and it's his beer and cigarette moment. Now, you would get punched in the face if you went up to that guy and you tried to argue with him that he wasn't satisfied. That is the picture of satisfaction right there. In fact, in that moment, there is nothing more satisfying to that person than a beer and a cigarette. Now, I'm sure you can imagine for yourself when beer and a cigarette is the most repulsive thing ever. Now, for some people, you would never want to have a beer and a cigarette. Beer and a cigarette would be the absolute epitome of satisfaction. It would be dissatisfaction. It would be repulsive, depending on who it is and what condition they're in and what situation they're in. So let's contrast satisfaction with some words. How about a word like gratification? Would gratification be a better word than satisfaction for describing our tradie at the pub on a Friday afternoon with a cigarette and a beer? Gratification often has a number of words put next to it. For example, instant gratification or bodily gratification. If we want to get a bit technical, we can say psychological gratification or ego gratification, reputation gratification. If we think of gratification, we notice that it's very rare, or I don't think we ever say anything about long-term gratification. We only say regular gratification. Gratification is something that happens sporadically. So this points out that satisfaction has a time dimension to it. It has a length of meaning to it. And perhaps that's why the question, are you satisfied, is a trick question, because you have to assess your times when you are gratified and the times when you're dissatisfied or ungratified, and you have to weigh them up. But I think that's only one way of coming at this question. I don't know if being satisfied is the average of your highs and lows, your happies and sads. Which brings us to another good word that we can contrast with satisfaction, and that is happiness. So happiness for a moment, happiness as a general feeling, as an assessment for your life, And of course, are you happy is a similar question to are you satisfied? And if we play this game of associating a word with satisfaction or contrasting it, we can start to identify different values and things that would lead us to conclude that we're not satisfied, but that satisfaction is not possibly the highest value. For example, peace. Are you peaceful? Do you have bliss? Are you unworried about things? And that's a very different dynamic to gratification, because peace implies a much more long-term vibe, a much more longer-lasting condition. What about excitement? Are you excited for something? Are you passionate about something? That's different again to peace and gratification. Or fun, pleasure, and pride. Variety. These are different again. You can have another category of conquering, triumphant, championing, domination. Is it satisfying to dominate something? To slay the game, as it were, to make a killing? You can see this a lot in sports. Being triumphant on the sport field is not necessarily satisfying, but it's more of a conquering. And perhaps conquering is part of satisfaction. Another big one of our psychological conditioning would be security. Do you feel secure in your position, in your social position, your financial position, your emotional position? Do you feel secure in the activities that you have, in where you're headed? This is quite different to being satisfied. Security might be a step up from being unsatisfied. And perhaps it's somewhere in between unsatisfied and satisfied. And now I'd like to bring in some deeper words that we can contrast satisfaction with. What about understanding? If you understand things, are you satisfied? Do you have a satisfactory understanding? What about awareness and experience? If you have a deep awareness and a rich experience, is it possible to live those and not necessarily be satisfied? What about fulfilment? Fulfillment is a funny one, because if we say we're fulfilled, it's different to we're satisfied, in that satisfaction implies that we needed something and we got it, whereas fulfillment implies that we were incomplete without something, we were empty without something, and we needed it to become full. We needed it to move towards a sense of oneness. We needed to do something in order to feel whole and to have a holistic feeling about us. I have read a book by Alex Ferguson. So allow me to remind you again who Alex Ferguson is. He is one of the greatest soccer coaches of all time. He has coached many teams, including the infamous Manchester United, and won more titles than anyone in his field. He's won 12 titles, in addition to 5 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, and 2 Champion Leagues. He is without a doubt one of the most influential and successful soccer coaches of all time. And it's staggering how many wins he has been able to achieve by constructing teams, cultivating talent, and developing routines and processes for training. And I was reading one of his books which discussed how he came up with these conveyor belts of talent, how he balanced an aging team, how he pitched different strengths together to construct a team. It also goes into the sorts of analysis that he did, the sorts of details and bigger picture analysis that he did. And one of the interesting things is that he actually doesn't do that much in-game analysis. He does more of the larger general dynamics. But one of the things that really stuck out for me when I read this book by Alex Ferguson was that he said after he'd won a championship, the glow lasted for about a day and a half. So this would be 8 months or more of hardcore work, sundown to sunup, sometimes longer, every single day, slogging away at building the team, the gnashing of teeth of getting them together, the harshness of coming down on those who aren't good enough, the brutal reality of firing and hiring, and the assessing of people in relation to a bigger cause, and enforcing a bigger cause on individuals. And after all that, after all the struggle, all the emotional turmoil, all the highs and lows and the tensions of wins and losses and near misses, and winning a championship, a huge celebration, a peak like no other, like I can only imagine what it's like to achieve such a height. And after all that, he says the glow, the feeling of success, lasted only about a day and a half or two. After that, it was back to the grind. It was back to analysis. It was back to building the routine, building the conveyor belt, cultivating the talent. And that for me shows that some people aren't satisfied, and perhaps they're better off that way. Perhaps they would say that satisfaction is not such a good value to have, and you should love the grind, you should love the burn towards success. But that really gets at the core of what is satisfaction. And the core is, what does it mean to you? How can you answer that for yourself? Do you need permission to be satisfied? Do you understand the conditions under which you are satisfied? Have you ever been satisfied? Can you think of a time when you've been satisfied? Do you know what it was like? Do you know what it had to be done in order for you to be satisfied? You can actually set this up as an experiment for yourself by saying, look, I'm going to set aside one special day, and for that one day only, I'm going to give myself all the things that I think I need to be satisfied just for a day. And you can plan it on your calendar, and you can get the things that you need. You might be in a specific place, you might have specific people around, you might do specific things, eat certain foods, and set it all up and see how you feel after that day. Maybe people's birthdays, the birthday party is a good example of this. It's my birthday, I'm doing whatever I want today. But at the end of that day, ask yourself, are you satisfied? Is there nothing in the back of your mind that leaves you wondering? And you really have to be honest with yourself. You have to have a deep sense of introspection and self-awareness in order to confront this question. Of course, confronting this question is an issue unto itself. People would always answer the question, are you satisfied, with yes. Yes, of course I'm satisfied. And you can't argue with that answer. You can't put it on someone else if you're having a conversation with them. You can't point out and say, well, no, you're not really satisfied. You don't know what real satisfaction is. Be careful for anyone who tells you that something isn't satisfactory, something isn't satisfying. That reminds me of a funny phrase that we use for job assessment or academic assessment. And the question goes, are you doing the job satisfactorily? Has the job been done to a satisfactory standard? Now, in that context, satisfaction sort of seems like, good enough. You've done pretty much all we need. It wasn't that great, but it's satisfied. What we need. Good enough, well done. You've passed this round. So it's interesting to see the different contexts in which this word satisfaction comes up. If anyone tells you what real satisfaction is, you should also be wary. Because it's up to individuals to work out what is satisfactory to them, and what they find satisfactory will depend on their own composition. Perhaps this is what leaves us with a little bit of a social anxiety or status anxiety when we log into our social media websites, because they are feeding us all these ideas of what satisfaction is. It's our friends, it's the advertising, it's the content, it's the pictures and images and videos and status updates that are feeding us this constant image of what is satisfying, what you need. This is what you really want, and if you get this, you will be fulfilled. You will feel good about yourself. That's when you'll have your satisfaction. And to always be contrasting yourself with this only leaves you with more desire. The whole dynamic of desiring something, going after it, and then getting it doesn't seem to make sense to me. Because you have to put yourself into the habit of desiring something in order to get something. Which means that when you arrive at getting that thing, you will be in the habit of wanting something. So this is what I'm trying to say about conditioning. If you condition yourself to always need something, to always want something, well, you might end up like Alex Ferguson. You'll be on the treadmill of success. You'll be on the conveyor belt of getting more, of winning. But you'll never actually arrive. You'll never actually get what you need. So what's the logical conclusion? To want nothing? Does this mean that I should do nothing? Well, yes. That is the logical conclusion. Satisfaction is only right now, just as peace is only right now. Understanding is only right now. And bliss and ecstasy and all these higher values, all these things that you are seeking, only exist right now at this very moment if you allow yourself to receive them. I think the initial defense would be to think that, well, that must mean I'm not going to go after anything. I'm not going to pursue my goals. And this is a naive response, because you can still pursue things in a manner which doesn't condition you to end up always wanting more. We can still act, we can still plan, we can still strategize and work towards a better future. But we need more complexity in how we understand the nature of working towards something. In an ideal world, we would want to be able to resolve this paradox of wanting and working towards something. What would it look like to be highly motivated, strategic, and disciplined in working towards a clear thought out goal and a higher richness in our surrounds, and also be totally detached and indifferent to the outcome? Why should these two things be opposing each other? Can we set up an ideal where we are always satisfied right now, and yet we also work towards bettering ourselves? I was talking with a friend of mine recently who put it quite eloquently. He said that on one hand, we've got the Indian monks and the Buddhists and the gurus telling us to sit on a cushion and feel bliss. Ecstasy is here, right now. All you have to do is receive it. And then on the other hand, we've got our Western capitalist culture, which is driven to working hard, slogging it out, building for success, getting more money, getting more material gain. And that must be our spectrum. This would be our two extremes. And we filled out some of the little words in between these two. But my friend was asking, how do we reconcile these two? Which one do we want? Which one is correct? Which is the right one? And I thought it was a really good question, and the answer that came to my mind was that we should add a time dimension to our spectrum. So this means that we don't want to be on one end or the other, but simply that we want to be able to do each one at different times throughout our day, week, month, and year. With that in mind, we should be working on our present bliss, our present ecstasy, and our accepting of satisfaction right now, and also at other times working towards material gain and success, however that be defined for you. And if we can add a further dimension to it, we should be constantly assessing what it means for us to have those things, and what is the best way for us to achieve those things. And if we can flesh out the farthest extremes of these points of the spectrum and make detailed gradients in between them all, then I think we can have a full spectrum of satisfaction in our lives. Thanks very much for tuning in. It's definitely been satisfying for me to explain these things as best I can. I hope it's a satisfactory explanation. My name is Andrew, and we'll be back soon with more.
This world goes over my head. I can't keep up with what's being